What kind of sportsman would allow one participant, one party, to predetermine the outcome? What kind of sport would allow one party to determine, for example, all the rules? What kind of sport would allow one party to choose the field of play? And what kind of sport would inflict such a terrifying, agonizing death and an inevitable death on an unwilling participant? None of this actually, it makes my blood run cold when I hear this disgusting practice described as a sport. My theory is, if they really want it to be a sport, well, let's make it a level playing field where these guys can go out into the jungle or out in the bush and where they're equally matched and hunt each other. Now, that would be a fair way of describing it as a sport. They can choose their weapons, choose the rules, and they will do it of their own volition. And that's the meaning of the word. It's actually a legal term, volenti non fit iuria. No harm is done to the person who consents. So if they go out into the bush and hunt each other voluntarily, no harm, no foul. But to hunt an innocent animal that's unaware of the peril it's being placed under, simply for the pleasure of somebody taking their life in the most brutal of forms, is a disgusting practice. And that's why I say this is not a sport. It's actually an atrocity defended only by the most ignoble of minds. It has no place in civilized society. And it's about time it was actually expunged from our lexicon. And it's time to confine it to the garbage dump of history. It has no place in any civilized society.
Yes, you couldn't have said it better, and I agree. People, humans need to, if you want to go out and track something, then there's enough of them, set them against each other. But I think part of it is there are a lot of just flat out lies that come out of the hunting industry, the hunting lobby, and it's enormous. They have a lot of money. As you had said, they hunt defenseless animals, but they demonize these animals. They claim, not only do they claim it's conservation, it's a sport. The animals are dangerous, or we have to manage them. What would you say to these claims from the hunting lobby that this must be done?
Well, you used the right term. It's not a four-letter word, lies. Rudyard Kipling, the Anglo-Indian writer who received the Nobel Prize, he wrote of young men dying in World War I. And if they ask you why we died, tell them that our fathers lied. That legacy of lies continues today. Everything we think we know about the way in which we interact with animals is a preposterous lie. So it's really about time we told everybody, including the government and people who participate in this atrocious industry, tell them the truth. Clearly, politely, but forcefully. The wise Chinese have a term for it, zheng jiao. Listen to the friend who tells you the truth, even when it hurts. So let's just tell the truth, fearlessly and forcefully. That is what the Sanskrit word satyagraha means, the truth force. So I think we're reaching a stage when we're almost on the cusp of something important happening, whilst we still have time. Brendan Kennelly in the Book of Judas wrote, if you want to serve your age, betray it. But what does that mean, to betray your age? It means expose its lies, humiliate its conceits, debunk its arrogance, and condemn them to face harsher truths. You're serving your age by us telling the truth. Forcefully, politely, firmly, but unrelentingly. We have an advantage. We have truth on our side. But unfortunately, the brutes and the bullies and their lobby groups have governments in their pockets.
think that's a big thing, is the amount of money that is in this industry seems globally. So another claim they make, of course, is that this conservation, when they go and kill an animal, the animal is either sacrificed for the greater good, and the local communities are helped by these killings, and these people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this. How would you address that?
Well, once again, that's a preposterous lie, and of course, Chris Mercer and a lot of people like that will debunk that nonsense quite easily. I mean, that's really an affront, an insult to human intelligence to listen to that kind of drivel. You know, governments often hire here in Australia after the bushfires professional shooters, so-called professional, to go out and kill so-called feral animals. And let's not forget the feral animals of Australia happen to be animals that we ignorant human beings brought here in the first place. You know, like bison, brumbies, horses, European carp, you just name it, rabbits, foxes, sure, and deer, they're feral. And that's what these guys want to go out and kill. So let's not be fooled by the spin and the rhetoric. The guys who are going out there with the blessing of the government are actually salivating. They're so thrilled because the government wants them to go and clean out all these animals. And for years, they've been lobbying the government to allow them to use guns and, of course, bows and arrows. So they have no intention they're not doing it because they're trying to do some social good. They're doing it because they enjoy, they get pleasure, a sick pleasure out of killing an animal in the most bizarre and obscene of ways.
So going back, as you mentioned, spin and rhetoric, when you talk about trophy hunting, this is kind of a bit of a twofold question. What is, define trophy hunting in your terms, and how does that differ, or do you consider there a difference between the trophy hunting and poaching? Because some trophy hunters will say, oh, well, if we didn't do it, there would be no money to protect from poachers. So how would you describe trophy hunting, collecting of animal parts, and then versus poaching?
They're two quite discrete aspects of human depravity. Trophy hunters, as a general rule, want to have the thrill of going out into an area and taking the life of an innocent animal. The trophy that they take back is often like a serial killer will take a part of the body part of one of the victims. A trophy hunter does the same thing to remind them of so-called past glories. And these so-called hunters go out into the jungle and into the bush. They go out in air-conditioned four-wheel drives. They're armed to the teeth. The poor animal, innocent animal, unaware that this is happening, is shot from a distance, and the body is butchered. I mean, we've got several projects in Africa, for example. It was a hideous sight for me to see these canned animal hunting projects, and they have a resident taxidermist on site. So these body parts could be taken back to their countries. You know, Alvin Toffler got it right. He said that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. We're dealing with the illiterate of the 21st century because they refuse to unlearn. And until you learn to unlearn, you're not going to learn. So I have a fairly apocalyptic view of the future because, as you know, we support about 500 projects in about 40 countries. And I think we see the very worst in human nature. And of course, my view of this is that we're running out of time. And that's why I don't focus on I don't become involved with single issue projects as a general rule. I try to have the work that we do spread as widely as possible to have a paradigm shift in the way in which we think. I'm sure you understand. I mean, you're doing it yourself. Getting people to get off the meat and dairy drug, to drop this absolutely anthropocentric way that we behave. You know, I often say that anthropocentrism is the ultimate sin. If Moses could have spelled it, he would have put it in the top 10. It's basically saying that everything that we see and do has got to be viewed through a prism of human experience. And what are we after all? A weak, reptilian-brained, mammalian, biped with an opposable thumb. We're not that important. And there are a lot of great thinkers on this planet today whose view I share, that this is going to be our final century. But hunting and candlelight hunting and canned hunting generally are obnoxious practices, but they're only examples, they're exemplars of a more insidious pathological sickness that seems to live in the hearts of some human beings.
And how do you feel, exactly what you said, I feel the same. How did we get to a point where, as you said, in the human world, a serial killer will murder multiple victims and take their parts, but if a human does it to multiple animals, how do you think we got to a point where we have accepted this and it's okay? You see these pictures all over, people are proud, they put their pictures next to the dead animal talking about how they love them. How do we get to a place like this?
In many respects, I think that times are changing. I think a time will come when killing an animal for sport will be seen like having, and I use this term with discretion, it will be seen like having an ugly mistress. You may desire her body, but you don't want to be seen out in public with her. That's, or him for that matter. And I think it'll be like smoking or wife beating or drinking to excess. It would be frowned upon by decent people. And I think the same is true about the meat and dairy industry. A time will come when meat and then people call them carnists, and of course they are. But Paul Watson and I call them necrovores. And these are necrovores in the purest sense. A time will come when they will be treated as the pariahs of the human species, and they will disappear. But once again, we're running out of time. As I often say, can I just give you a couple of numbers that just pop into my head?
Yeah.
In human history, only 100 billion human beings have ever lived. 7.5 billion people are alive today. And we human beings torture and kill 2 billion sentient, living, loving animals every week on land. We stab and suffocate 1 billion ocean animals every 8 hours. 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one. And we now face the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. If any other organism did this, a biologist would call it a bloody virus. It is a crime of unimaginable proportions. If human beings were killed at the same rate, we would be wiped out in 1 weekend. Now, if any of my algorithms are true, and they all are, it means we are on the brink of disaster. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead. The lungs and the arteries of the earth. And oceans sequester more CO2 than all the forests of the world put together. So if I'm right, it means that no child under the age of 5 is ever going to reach retirement age. It is a mathematical impossibility. It just can't be done unless there's a massive, radical change in the behavior, conduct, and ethics of human beings. It's that simple.
Those numbers are staggering. I think when you talk about those numbers, it's really, of course, with animal agriculture, you know, we continue to breed, but for wildlife, it's amazing to me sometimes there's anything that lives out there.
Well, I'm sure you're absolutely right. So for example, I don't know if you ever saw that one little picture. Carl Sagan had it. It was a photograph taken from the Voyager spacecraft, I think in 1974, of a tiny little pinhole of space. And it was a myriad of little pale, tiny little dots of light going out in one little segment of the universe. And in that massive myriad was one tiny little pinprick of light. And Carl Sagan said, that's us. That's our home. Every person who ever lived, was born, fell in love, lived there. He said, and it's our tiny little speck suspended on a sunbeam. That's our home, our pale blue dot. Well, today, 30% of the biomass of all terrestrial animals on land are human beings. 66% of all the terrestrial mass, the biomass of animals on the planet, are in slaughterhouses. A minuscule 4% of the biomass are wild animals living as nature intended. 4%. 70% of all the bird life on this planet are in cages awaiting slaughter. We have turned Carl Sagan's pale blue beautiful dot, our pale blue planet Earth, into blood-stained planet slaughterhouse, a pox on this species.
Yeah, some days it feels hopeless, but I know in the years you've been doing this, you've met a lot of people, you support a lot of initiatives. Do you feel a hope at all for change? What I know a lot of it is sometimes beyond individual change. It's got to be system change. What is there hope, and if there is, what needs to happen?
I'm by nature an optimistic person. I don't see a great deal of reason for it, but every so often I see a speck of light that gives me some hope to recharge my batteries. I have a feeling, we travel around to see some of our projects, and we see a lot of young people, not necessarily young, people of all ages, in fact, coming along to the projects and being affected by what we see. I gave speeches in India, for example, and to 2,000 wealthy Indian entrepreneurs. And I mean, we had, sitting in the front row was Amartya Sen, who just won India's Nobel in economics. And at the end of the speech, so many of those entrepreneurs came up to me and said, we're going to turn all our factory canteens into being vegetarian. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of meals a day. Of course, two problems. One is it's not vegan, it's vegetarian, but that's a start. It's a small battle won. When we go up, the projects that we're investing heavily in, particularly with Sea Shepherd, for example, we're making a massive difference in Africa, as you probably know. 52 ships have been arrested from China and from the European Union. Now, when you think about the number of lives that are actually being saved, I'm talking about sentient lives, but they happen to live in the oceans. Now, many, many people who know us, they've been to see our projects, and they've touched the buildings, and they've talked to the people, and they know all about them. But not in the ocean, because out of sight is out of mind. We've turned the poor ocean into it's either our pantry or we treat it as a public toilet. Pacific Gyre, I'm sure, as you know, you probably did the crossing, is now full of plastic, junk, and human feces. It's created a floating footprint bigger than India. I took Peter Hamstead and Sid Chakravarti to have a look at many of my projects in India. And I remember many, many years swimming in the Bay of Bengal. And this time we were driving into a place called Visakhapatnam, where we have one of our biggest projects, and with the windows down. And I could smell the feces in the ocean even before we got there. So this has become a public tour. But at the same time, our Kindness Kids program is growing rapidly. You know, we've got so many young people coming out. We started in 2008 with just an idea, getting kids, giving them incentives and encouragement to go home and convert their parents to being vegetarian, and their neighbors and little friends in their community. Now, I don't know how many people are involved right now, but I think it's several hundred schools with over 1,500 teachers, all pushing the vegetarian message. But we also hit the wall of economics. As a country becomes richer, the per capita income increases. Unfortunately, they follow all the bad habits of the West, and the percentage of their diet that's devoted to meat and dairy goes up. But glimmers of hope. So we have to be optimistic, and because we're running out of time.
And I think it's I agree. It's devastating what like I said, the smallest species has done to damage so many others that don't deserve the horrors we've inflicted upon them. So why should, for our topic today, for trophy hunting, why should people care about these animals? And what are some of the other challenges? You just talked a lot about human impact, what we're doing just thoughtlessly, mindlessly. What are the other impacts that these animals are facing because of humans? That gives these hunters an excuse, and that gives others an excuse to wipe them out.
You've used the right term. There are no good reasons to kill a wild animal, just excuses. There is no good reason for it at all. And once again, it gets down to this anthropocentric notion that we have dominion over them. They become property. The definition of property in the business circle is something that you own and you have the right to use, abuse, or destroy. So if you look at your desk and you own it, you have an absolute right to use it, abuse it, or destroy it. And we've decided that animals are our property. And therefore we have the right to do those three things to them: use them, abuse them, or destroy them. And that's what we're doing. Now, hunting is just one exemplar of the problem that wild animals face all around the world. But in some parts of the world, Africa and Asia, it's the human-animal conflict. As the human footprint expands from the villages and districts in other regions, it's usurping the amount of real estate that animals actually need, and the wild animals do. You know, you can go through the vast list of animals who need vast areas of land to walk every day because they're not sedentary animals used to living in a zoo.
They're almost literally.
Sorry, I'm just mistake.
Oh, they're almost literally being fenced in.
Yeah, and we're building. We've recently been to Africa to look at some of our projects, and the number of roads and highways and freeways going across the whole continent. The big belt that China is going to build is going to be so massive. So there's no possible way that these animals are going to be able to travel like they used to and cross freeways and not get killed. There's going to be more human-animal conflict in the future, And the only people who will suffer will be the animals. The only people, the only souls that will suffer will be the animals. And it's sure, hunting is a significant part of the problem, and I know that's something very close to your heart. But part of the human-animal conflict is caused by the encroachment of human beings into the animal space for agriculture, mining, forestry, that kind of thing. And of course, agriculture is the biggest, the animal agriculture. I call it the animal industrial complex. We've been doing that since 1985. It's like the industrial military complex. It is the most powerful negative vector force on the planet today. So the only solution I see is for a rapid and radical shift in our value system, of course, but also in our diets. And one of the messages I'm trying to get across to people is that the most beautiful word ever written in any language, in any country, at any time in human history came from India, from the Upanishads 3,000 years ago. Ahimsa, non-violence to any living being. Now, that is such a beautiful word, not because it describes our politics, our religion, our nationality, our lifestyle, or our diet, but because it describes our character. Non-violence to any living being, to any living animal, to our friends, our families, and to ourselves. Non-violence. If we could get that notion of ahimsa into the body politic, into the way in which we behave, into our daily discourse, we'll go a long way towards solving the problem voluntarily, without doing it through legislation or rallies. People will change. But I concede it's a difficult task, and hunting is one piece of it. And I know because I grew up as a child in India. As the departing British Raj, the sun was setting on their 300 years of domination of that united country. And they left behind a very nasty tradition of hunting. And it was considered manly, almost a rite of passage, for a young man to go out and shoot his first panther. And needless to say, I was taken out to so-called shoot my own panther, but that's a story in itself, and it's been written up quite extensively as to what happened. Truth be told, they made me carry the bait, a little goat that they bought at market in the car. The little animal was sitting on my lap, and she had been taken away from her mum, and she urinated in my lap. Her heart was racing, she was terrified. And they have a thing called a mashan up in the trees at night, platform, and they tied the goat at the bottom of the tree. And I was given the rifle, and the little goat was crying and bleeding in the night, waiting for the panther to come down. Of course, the panther did come down, and I had a shikari, a famous hunter, who was there to guide me. And all I could remember was tears running down my eyes. I felt I was drowning and having an asthma attack at the same time. And I just kept shaking and sobbing. Of course, it'll be 50 years this Christmas since that happened, more than 50 years. The shikari took the rifle away from me. There would be no killing of a panther for me that night or any other night. But people decided, my macho, tough friends, word spread in our community that Philip turned out to be a sissy. He didn't have the guts to kill an animal. And I didn't then, and I never have. But that's what it's considered in some circles, and even particularly in the West, I would have to say that hunting is still considered to be a manly pursuit. And it is to some people, but I think it's a preposterously stupid assertion. unless you define manliness as boorish, brutal, crude, unenlightened, mean, murderous, these are not manly. They are the traits of monsters. Products. It's that simple.
It is that simple. We just have to educate and inform and make the system change. You had touched on education of children is very important in a lot of places. Like you said, tradition, they take children out to hunt. They even show them how to use other animals to hunt animals. So it's ingrained sometimes in our kids here. They're taken to trips to farms, animal agriculture farms, to normalize this behavior. So I think education, you touched on some of your programs that work with children, and entrepreneurial spirit, just how do we create, there's a lot of new products and information coming out now. But what would you say some of the things that individuals might be able to do to help affect change? And I know that's a very big question, but people sometimes feel helpless, and they see this happening. They see a picture on Facebook, or they see these videos of these animals, the ocean destruction, and they feel helpless. But you're an individual, and you may change, and you work with a lot of, like you said, projects and organizations. How can an individual contribute and help?
The first thing I would say is that individuals have got to stop being so diffident and insecure and feel that they're on the back foot. They've got to remember they are on the right side of history. They are in the right. So when you base everything you do from that premise, everything else falls into place. Don't be insecure. I know I got into trouble with the so-called recreational fishing lobby, because I described recreational fishing as a line of filament, hook at one end, and a moron at the other. That's exactly how I feel about fishing, the recreational fishing industry. We've got to stop pussyfooting around. We've got to confront some of the major negative vector forces that contribute to the hunting industry. And I have to say this, one of the leading causes of this malaise comes out of the United States, largely funded by a disgusting, vile organization called the NRA. Unfortunately, the United States has now got, I hate to call him a president, I think he's just a squatter who's got keys to the White House, and he's not going to leave it without a fight. And if he does, he's going to be like a recalcitrant tenant who's been evicted from a property, and he'll leave some rotting fish hidden underneath the carpets. You know, the building that housed Jefferson and Washington and Lincoln has been tarnished by this loud, boorish, brash ignoramus whose idiot sons think that hunting is a noble pursuit. Unfortunately, the United States still has some residual power, and the NRA, as vile an organization as it is, still has some influence over him. And of course, your Republican Party. In fact, I refuse to call them the Republican Party anymore. They've become like Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party, and Trump's two sons have become like Uday and Qusay, Saddam Hussein's two idiotic sons too. And these two characters are leading lights in promoting the hunting tragedy. And now, of course, we've got the Second Amendment characters bleating on about how any changes to their rights is a major cause of anything they might do in the future. So you've asked a very complex question. I probably haven't given you a satisfactory answer, but men and women of good reason have got to accept that We're dealing with a vile foe, well capitalized, with entrenched belief systems which are sick and cruel and ignoble. And it's not a fair fight, but it's a fight worth having.
Well, first, I agree. Don't even get me started on 45.
It's also his IQ.
Horrified since day one, and before that. But yes, I agree. We say that a lot. Of course, in our organization, Animal Rights, we believe every animal is an individual and has a right to life, and they are important. But each person has a step they can take, and that's important, because all of the individuals who are kind and compassionate, if we all took action, then we could be incredibly powerful. And I think we can't let that feeling that there's nothing I can do, because each of these movements is started by one person. And
Susan, I love the name of your organization, and I say very often, it's not just about animal rights. It's also about human wrongs. What we're doing is fundamentally wrong by any measure. It is a nasty practice, and it's beneath us. And it's about time that people of good reason, of every nationality, pulled all the levers of power that they have through their governments, and also through their churches, their mosques, their synagogues. There is no faith that I know of that encourages any one of their adherents or their followers to go out and kill an animal for fun. There is none. So it would be nice if the imams and the bishops and the archbishops and the popes and the rabbis said what they mean and mean what they say. Tell everybody that they come across in their flocks that killing an animal for fun and for food is a vile practice, and it has no place in any of their houses of worship. That would go a long way to speeding up the day when this will no longer be a bloodstained planet.
I agree, and yeah, it's incredibly powerful what you say, and I hope people take it to heart. And we
Susan, you're quite right. Something is going to happen. The movement away from the consumption of animals that have a heartbeat. Animals are not just collective biology. Each of them has an individual biography. So the movement that we're involved with at the moment is actually a revolutionary event. It's more powerful than the Industrial Revolution, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Hubble telescope, or anything ever conceived by Galileo, Copernicus, Einstein, Darwin, or Freud, because it protects the most precious of all things, life. Ultimately, we can't lose, because we are on the right side of history. If we fail, this will indeed be the end of history. Certainly the end of history worth having. That's how I feel.